It started quietly. No one in the Interstellar Council thought much of the strange new signals that began echoing through the dark regions of known space. The Council's sensor stations picked them up one by one, faint electromagnetic bursts, carrier waves, and encrypted pulses moving between distant systems. At first, they seemed like random static, nothing more than noise created by an overactive young species somewhere near a blue planet orbiting a small yellow star. For thousands of years, the Interstellar Council had managed peace across hundreds of civilizations. They had learned the cost of war long ago, and since then diplomacy had become their shield. Conflicts were settled with debates, not weapons. Borders were protected by treaties, not armies. To most of them, the idea of a species still investing in military power felt like something from ancient times. But then came Earth. Humanity had just stepped beyond its own star system, proud, impatient, and unstoppable. Their early messages to nearby council listening stations were short and strangely confident. They didn't sound like explorers asking for help. They sounded like soldiers announcing their arrival. The first official report described humans as a Category 3 developing civilization, which, by council law, meant they were to be watched but not contacted. Normally, such civilizations were still learning, still building stable societies before being invited to join the galactic community. The Council's observers wrote that Earth was chaotic, unpredictable, and emotionally unstable. They expected humanity to take centuries to mature. They were wrong. Within only a few decades, Earth's engineers had pushed technology faster than any predicted model. The jump to faster-than-light travel, something most civilizations took millennia to master, came to them like a storm. It wasn't elegant or refined like the Council's method. It was rough, unstable, and full of risk, but it worked. Humanity didn't wait for the perfect design. They built what they needed and tested it in the field. The Council couldn't believe it. To them, humans looked reckless, sending small ships into hyperspace with barely tested drives, often losing half their crews in the process. But to humans, those losses were lessons. Every failure became fuel for improvement. Every mission, no matter how dangerous, was a step forward. They weren't afraid of breaking things, they were afraid of standing still. When the first human fleet reached the outer edge of Council space, it caused panic among the observing species. Not because the fleet was large, in truth it wasn't, but because it arrived without permission, without the usual months of communication and preparation that the Council required. Humanity had not asked for entry. They simply appeared. The Council immediately sent probes to observe them. They expected to see clumsy ships held together by crude metal and weak shields. What they saw instead were vessels covered in armor plating thicker than any known warship. Machines built not for beauty, but for survival. Their engines burned with raw, chaotic energy, and their hulls carried the scars of testing in extreme conditions. The first transmission came soon after. "This is Earth Command to the Interstellar Council. We come in peace, but we will not be ignored." The message shocked everyone. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, direct, and unapologetic. Most young species began their first contact with nervous respect, often begging for alliance or trade. Humanity didn't beg, they announced. The Council debated for days about what to do. Some members argued that Earth should be ignored until they understood proper diplomacy. Others wanted to send ambassadors to teach them the ways of peace. But a smaller group, and the ones who studied human behavior through intercepted data, warned that Earth was unlike any civilization before it. They had watched Earth's history through transmissions that leaked into space, recordings of wars, peace treaties, revolutions, art, and exploration. What they saw confused them. Humans could build weapons powerful enough to destroy themselves, yet they also painted, sang, wrote poetry, and cried over fictional stories. They could argue for years, fight bitterly, and then come together to rebuild what they had destroyed. To the Council, this made no sense. To humanity, it made perfect sense. They had evolved that way. The Council underestimated the meaning of that balance. Strength born from struggle, unity born from survival. Soon, reports began coming in from the border systems. Human reconnaissance drones were mapping regions far beyond what they were allowed to explore. The Council sent warnings, polite, carefully worded notices reminding Earth about boundaries. In return, humans sent acknowledgement messages and kept exploring anyway. At first, this behavior angered the council. It was seen as rude and disrespectful, but when scientists analyzed the data, they realized humans weren't trying to provoke anyone. They were simply doing what they had always done, pushing limits. On Earth, boundaries were meant to be tested. Curiosity wasn't just a habit. It was a survival instinct. The council's leaders held a private meeting to discuss the growing concern. In the vast circular hall of the Central Assembly, representatives from dozens of worlds gathered, tall, slender beings with glowing eyes, amphibian-like creatures in glass chambers, mechanical species humming softly. All of them spoke with the same tone of uncertainty. Who were these humans and what did they want? One representative, an elder from the Virilan race, summarized it clearly. Humans are not looking for war, she said, but they are not afraid of it either. That simple sentence hung in the chamber for hours. Meanwhile, on Earth's side, humanity saw things differently. They had spent centuries wondering if they were alone, and now that they knew the galaxy was full of life, they weren't about to act weak. Earth's governments, now united under a single interstellar command, believed that respect in the galaxy would not be given. It had to be earned. So they showed strength, not submission. Human media on Earth called it the Great Leap. News networks broadcast the historic launch of the first deep space fleet, not as explorers, but as ambassadors of strength. The ships carried not only scientists and diplomats but also military officers. They wanted to be ready for anything. Humanity's motto was simple: hope for peace, prepare for the opposite. When those ships finally entered Council-monitored space, their appearance caused a diplomatic storm. Some Council species panicked, fearing invasion. Others were fascinated, eager to meet these bold newcomers. The Council sent out a formal greeting, long, ceremonial, and full of flowery phrases. Earth's reply was only 3 sentences long. Message received. Coordinates confirmed. Expect human representatives soon. There was no arrogance in that message, just confidence. The kind of calm certainty that comes from a species used to surviving the impossible. Within a few months, humans established a small diplomatic station near the neutral zone. It wasn't fancy, just metal halls, bright lights, and simple quarters for living. But what surprised the Council's observers was how efficient it was. Everything had a purpose. Humans moved with focus, worked with discipline, and spoke with honesty. They didn't try to impress. They tried to understand. Yet beneath that polite surface, there was always a quiet edge, a readiness that made others uneasy. Even when they smiled, there was a feeling that humans were always watching, always measuring. The Council began to realize that Earth's people didn't trust easily. Their entire history had taught them that peace could vanish overnight. On Earth, storms came without warning. Empires rose and fell. Survival depended on awareness and preparation. That mindset had followed them into space. By the end of that first year, the Council's analysts had filled countless reports trying to define humanity's character. Some called them the aggressive explorers. Others called them the builders of chaos. But the most accurate label came from a quiet historian within the Council who simply wrote, "They are not conquerors. They are survivors." And that made all the difference. In the months that followed, humanity began offering small pieces of technology to the Council. Energy systems, medical advancements, and defensive shielding ideas. It was their way of saying, we're not enemies, we're contributors. But deep down, every Council member could sense something else. Earth's inventions were designed with layers of defense in mind. Weapons hidden beneath peaceful tools. Systems that could turn from research to combat in seconds. It was as if every human machine carried the same message. We hope this is never used, but if it must be, it will work. That quiet truth made the Council uneasy. The peace that had lasted for 10,000 years was suddenly uncertain. Not because humans had threatened anyone, they hadn't fired a single shot, but because their presence reminded the galaxy of something long forgotten. Strength could still exist alongside peace. Power could still serve protection, and sometimes the will to fight was what kept peace alive. In that first year, as human ships glided through the Council's skies and their ambassadors walked through alien halls, everyone realized that history had just changed. The galaxy was no longer ruled by comfort or tradition. A new force had arrived, one that didn't fit into the Council's old ways. Earth was here, and the universe would never be the same again. The arrival of humanity was supposed to be a small event, just another young species stepping into the vast community of stars. At least that's what the Interstellar Council believed, but as time passed it became clear that Earth didn't follow the usual pattern. Humanity was not interested in being another peaceful member in a long chain of obedient civilizations. They had their own way of doing things, and that unsettled everyone. At first, the Council tried to understand them through observation. Every recorded message, every trade proposal, every broadcast from Earth was studied line by line. Council scholars filled entire data archives trying to decode what they called the human contradiction. How could a species that spoke of peace build such powerful machines of war? How could they smile and laugh while carrying scars from endless conflict? How could a civilization that had nearly destroyed itself now travel among the stars stronger than ever? The answers didn't fit into the Council's logic. For ages, the galaxy's great species had evolved past aggression. They saw war as a failure of reason, something primitive, something beneath them. They built cities that floated in clouds, societies where hunger and disease were long forgotten. Even their fleets, once the pride of ancient empires, had been converted into transport and rescue vessels. Weapons were outdated, locked away, or dismantled completely. To the Council, peace wasn't just an ideal, it was their identity. So when humans began expanding at a rapid pace, building stations on asteroids and establishing colonies on distant moons, the Council's analysts assured their leaders it was nothing to worry about. They will settle down, they said. They will follow the same path every new race takes: discovery, curiosity, and then integration. But that never happened. Humanity didn't slow down. They kept pushing further, mining deep in asteroid fields that no other species dared to enter, exploring dangerous nebulae where navigation systems failed. Where others saw risk, humans saw opportunity. Every corner of the galaxy that had been abandoned or left unexplored slowly started showing signs of human presence. And wherever they went, they built not delicate, elegant structures like the Council species preferred, but strong, practical ones. Metal bases, thick shields, and defense towers that could survive anything. To human engineers, beauty was in functionality. A machine didn't have to look perfect. It only had to work and keep working no matter what. This difference made the Council uneasy. Their observers wrote that humans seemed to live with a constant expectation of danger. Even in peace, they prepared for war. No other species did that anymore. To the Council, it felt like paranoia. To humanity, it was common sense. Inside the Central Assembly Hall, long meetings stretched for hours. Representatives from different worlds argued about what to do. Some said humanity's behavior was harmless, just part of their nature. Others believed it was a threat waiting to grow. The oldest members of the Council remembered the ancient wars of the past, times when powerful species nearly destroyed entire systems. They feared that history might repeat itself, this time because of humans. Still, they decided to wait. The Council always believed in patience. After all, diplomacy had solved everything for thousands of years. They thought humanity would eventually adapt to their peaceful ways. But that assumption, that calm and control would win over curiosity and instinct, was their first mistake. Back on Earth, people had a very different view of the galaxy. They respected the Council but didn't fear it. To humans, strength and peace weren't opposites. They were partners. Peace lasted only when strength existed to defend it. That mindset was written deep in their culture, from their history books to their training academies. Their explorers weren't just scientists. They were protectors. Every mission carried soldiers and engineers side by side. When Council observers saw this, they were shocked. In their eyes, the idea of mixing diplomacy and defense was dangerous. "Why arm a ship that carries ambassadors?" they asked. Humans answered simply, "Because safety is not guaranteed by words." Those words traveled fast through Council channels, and they didn't like the message. To them, it sounded too bold, too confident, almost disrespectful. But humanity didn't mean it as a challenge. They were just being honest. On their world, survival had always depended on being ready. That thinking didn't change just because they reached the stars. Months turned into years. Human colonies expanded quickly, far faster than anyone predicted. Their ability to adapt amazed even their critics. Planets that other species had declared unlivable were transformed into thriving settlements. Harsh weather, toxic air, unstable terrain, nothing stopped them. They built domes, converted storms into power sources, and used every inch of ground. If there was one thing humans refused to do, it was give up. Still, rumors began to spread among council citizens. Whispered stories about how human ships could fight entire fleets, tales of invisible weapons that could pierce any shield. Most of it wasn't true, but fear doesn't need proof to grow. The council's people started to wonder, had they allowed a dangerous species into their peaceful space? The council leaders decided to act before panic turned into chaos. They called for an official inspection, a peaceful review of human military technology. Their reason sounded harmless. They said it was to ensure safety and transparency for all members. But deep down, everyone knew it was about control. They wanted to know exactly how strong Earth's forces were. When the message reached Earth Command, humanity's response was calm but firm. They agreed to cooperate, but they refused to reveal every detail of their defenses. Trust is earned both ways, the reply said. You do not ask a friend to hand over their shield. The council didn't like that answer. It wasn't openly defiant, but it wasn't submissive either. It showed that humans were not afraid, and that, more than anything, worried them. Behind closed doors, council generals held a private meeting. Many of them had never seen combat, their positions mostly ceremonial. They believed humanity's refusal to fully cooperate was a sign of arrogance. They must be reminded who holds power in this galaxy, one of them said. Plans were drawn up for what they called a demonstration of authority. It wasn't meant to start a war. The idea was simple. Send a fleet to perform military exercises near a human-controlled system, close enough to make a statement, but far enough to avoid direct conflict. It was supposed to intimidate, to show that the council still ruled the stars. But intimidation doesn't work on those who have lived through struggle, and humanity had been through far worse. Before the fleet even left council space, humans detected their movement. Their sensors, sharp and precise, tracked every shift in trajectory, every power signal. Humanity didn't panic. They didn't send warnings or demands. They simply began quiet preparations. Civilian stations were secured, defense satellites repositioned, and communication lines encrypted. Every step was calm, coordinated, and practiced. On the surface, Earth's leaders continued to speak of peace. They sent messages to the council asking for clarification. We hope this is not a show of force, one broadcast said. Our colonies are unarmed and open for inspection. But behind those calm words, fleets were ready, just in case. When the council's demonstration fleet finally reached the outer rim of human-controlled space, everything changed. What was meant to be a symbolic show of strength suddenly became a test of will. A silent moment that would decide the galaxy's future balance of power. As the council ships entered human territory, their captains expected to see nervous diplomats or scared colonists. Instead, they found silence. Every human outpost had powered down its visible defenses. No aggressive moves, no threatening broadcasts, just an eerie calm as if the humans were waiting. For several hours, both sides stood still. Then slowly, from the darkness of space, a massive object emerged, smooth, metallic, and unlike anything the council had seen. It was the UNSV Dauntless, a human vessel built not for beauty but for endurance. It didn't carry bright lights or golden banners. It carried quiet power, the kind that didn't need to speak loudly to be understood. The council fleet's commanders hesitated. Their ships were designed for speed and exploration, not heavy combat. The Dauntless, by contrast, looked like a fortress that could move. Its surface armor reflected incoming scans, hiding every weapon system. But the most striking thing was its silence. No aggressive signals, no threats. It simply hovered there, watching. The council's commanders ordered a maneuver, a harmless one meant to test the ship's reaction. The Dauntless didn't move. Instead, a calm message came through every channel. Council fleet detected. You are in restricted space. Please clarify intent. There was no fear in that voice. Just clarity. What happened next would shake the council to its core. But that is a story for another part. For now, what mattered was the realization that dawned on the galaxy that day. A realization that echoed across every communication channel, every government chamber, and every planet that watched from afar. The Interstellar Council had misjudged humanity. They thought Earth was young, reckless, and easily influenced. They were wrong. Humanity was patient, disciplined, and incredibly strong. They didn't seek war, but they were prepared for one. And that quiet strength, that unwavering confidence, was something the galaxy hadn't seen in thousands of years. The Council fleet drifted silently through the dark edge of human-controlled space. Their ships were bright and smooth, covered with polished armor that reflected starlight like mirrors. They were built more for beauty than battle, symbols of order and peace. The commanders aboard believed this mission was simple. They didn't expect resistance. They just wanted to remind humanity who held authority in the galaxy. But what they didn't understand was that humans didn't respond to power the same way other species did. For humanity, strength wasn't something to fear. It was something to respect. Far ahead, the human vessel UNSV Dauntless waited, still, silent, and patient. It didn't flash warning lights or show signs of aggression. It simply existed in that space like a giant shadow with a heartbeat of steel and energy. Its hull looked rough, covered in layers of reinforced plating, the kind that told stories of hard tests and near disasters. It wasn't elegant like the Council's ships, but it carried the presence of something alive, something built to endure. Inside the Dauntless, there was no panic. Every officer and engineer moved with calm discipline. They had trained for this kind of situation 100 times. The screen showed the incoming Council fleet, dozens of ships forming a wide formation. The humans didn't see them as enemies, not yet. But they knew this demonstration could easily turn into something else. The communication channels remained quiet until a soft chime echoed through the bridge. A Council transmission came through, polite but cold. Unidentified human vessel, you are operating in contested space. Power down your systems and prepare for inspection. The Dauntless didn't reply immediately. The crew waited for instructions from Earth Command. A few seconds passed, and then a voice responded calmly, almost like a teacher addressing a classroom. Council Fleet, this is Earth Command Vessel Dauntless. You are entering a restricted human sector. We request that you maintain distance and clarify your purpose. There was no anger in the tone, just professionalism. On the Council side, the fleet commanders exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even an apology. Instead, they heard confidence. The humans weren't defiant, but they also weren't intimidated. It was the kind of tone that belonged to those who knew their strength but chose restraint. The Council officers debated what to do next. Their mission was to show presence, not start conflict. But pride is a fragile thing, and the Council's leaders were used to being obeyed without question. So to maintain authority, they ordered a display and nothing harmful, just a small maneuver. Their ships began to shift into a tighter formation, engines glowing brighter as if to remind the humans that they were surrounded. On the Dauntless, alarms quietly flashed, but no one panicked. The crew adjusted their shields, increased distance slightly, and waited. The human commander's voice came again, calm, measured, and firm. Council Fleet, your movement is being interpreted as aggressive. Please halt. We do not wish for misunderstandings. There was silence. Then the Council Fleet sent another message, this time sharper. Stand down, Earth vessel. You are to comply immediately. The moment hung heavy in space. For the first time since joining the stars, humanity stood eye to eye with the galaxy's oldest authority, and neither side was willing to back down. Inside the Dauntless, technicians monitored every reading. Power levels, weapon systems, life signs, everything stayed stable. Humanity had no plan to fire the first shot. They wanted peace, but peace with dignity. Suddenly, one of the Council ships launched a pulse, a scanning beam meant to inspect the Dauntless. It wasn't an attack, just a sensor sweep. But on human instruments, it looked dangerously close to a weapons charge. The bridge lights flickered for a moment. Then, as if it had been planned for years, the Dauntless moved. Its engines flared silently, and the massive ship turned with precision, not running away, but taking a defensive position between the Council fleet and the nearby human colony. What happened next was not war. It was a lesson. The Dauntless released a controlled energy burst, a harmless wave that disrupted the Council's scans. Their sensors flickered, their systems glitched for a few seconds. Then the Council fleet's communications filled with confusion. None of their instruments could lock onto the human vessel. It was like the Dauntless had vanished from their targeting systems, even though it was right in front of them. Inside the Council's flagship, technicians scrambled to recalibrate their sensors. This can't be right, one of them muttered. They're jamming our frequencies but not attacking. The commander frowned. "They're sending a message," he said quietly. "They're showing us what they can do," without firing a shot, and he was right. Humanity wasn't fighting, they were demonstrating control. Every move was calculated to avoid harm while still proving a point, that they could protect themselves, and that the Council's old ways of intimidation wouldn't work anymore. Within minutes, the Dauntless restored communication and sent a final message. "Council fleet, this area is now under joint observation. We suggest returning to neutral space. Humanity respects the Council, but respect must go both ways." The Council commander hesitated. His advisors urged him to respond firmly, but deep down he knew what had just happened. The humans had disabled their scans, blocked their systems, and controlled the situation, all without causing damage. It was not an act of war. It was mastery. He gave the order to retreat. The fleet slowly turned away, engines glowing faintly as they began their journey back to Council territory. Officially, the mission was declared complete. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. The demonstration had failed, but not because of violence. It failed because of realization. For centuries, the Council had ruled through reputation. Their authority came from the belief that no one could challenge them. But in a few short minutes, humanity had changed that belief forever. Back on Earth, news of the encounter spread quickly. The Dauntless became a symbol, not of power, but of restraint. People across the planet felt proud, not because they had scared the galaxy, but because they had stood their ground with discipline and intelligence. Even those who had once feared space travel began to see humanity's place among the stars differently. They weren't just guests anymore. They were equals. In the council chambers, things were different. The representatives argued for weeks about what had happened. Some claimed the humans had broken protocol. Others warned that confronting them again would only make things worse. The few who understood human nature tried to explain. "They didn't attack us," one ambassador said. "They simply showed us that they are not to be underestimated." Still, pride and politics clouded the discussion. Old leaders didn't like the idea of a newcomer outsmarting them. They began planning new policies, more control, stricter monitoring of human expansion. But their fear had already started to change into something else: respect. In the following months, small reports from across the galaxy confirmed what many had started to suspect. Human ships were appearing in systems far from home, helping repair damaged satellites, sharing resources with struggling colonies, and even assisting in disaster zones. They weren't conquering, they were contributing. But everywhere they went, they brought the same quiet confidence that the Dauntless had shown that day. The Council's citizens began to talk about humanity in a new way. No longer as reckless intruders, but as protectors, strange, determined, and strong. Some called them the steel-hearted ones, others the Stormwalkers. They had become a mystery the galaxy couldn't ignore. Inside Earth Command, however, humanity didn't celebrate too loudly. They knew that their actions had drawn attention, both good and bad. Their leaders gathered privately and reviewed the entire event. One of them summed it up perfectly. "We didn't win anything today. We only proved we're ready for what's coming next." And they were right. The Council's pride had been wounded, and history had shown that pride, when mixed with fear, often leads to bigger storms. Still, in that quiet space between the stars, the message had been sent and understood. Earth wasn't a threat, but neither was it a follower. The Council had wanted to display its power. Instead, it had witnessed humanity's strength, not in violence but in control. The kind of power that came from experience, unity, and the will to survive. From that day onward, the galaxy began to see humanity differently. They weren't just a young civilization with ambition. They were a reminder of what the galaxy had once been: brave, creative, and unafraid to stand up for themselves. That moment, the silent standoff at the edge of space, became known throughout history as the Epsilon Encounter. No war, no destruction, no victory parades. Just understanding. The kind that changes everything. The news of the Epsilon Encounter spread faster than light itself. Within days, the story reached every corner of the Interstellar Council's territories, from glittering core worlds to the quiet mining colonies on the edge of space. No one could believe it. The mighty Council fleet, built on centuries of reputation and diplomacy, had turned away from a confrontation with a single human ship. And not because they were attacked, but because they realized they couldn't control the situation. For a galaxy that had known peace for thousands of years, this was more than an incident. It was a wake-up call. The Council tried to control the story, labeling it as a routine misunderstanding. Their public reports claimed that no aggression had occurred and that both sides had handled the matter peacefully. But the truth had already escaped through countless witnesses and communication logs. The galaxy's citizens had seen the transmission feeds, heard the tone of the human commander, and watched as the Dauntless stood its ground with steady calm. The people talked, and their stories changed faster than the Council could rewrite them. On the outer colonies, traders and explorers whispered in awe about the humans. They faced the Council fleet without firing a single shot, one miner said over a crowded comm channel. They didn't need to fight, they just stood there, and the Council backed down. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy's oldest rulers were being questioned. In the grand halls of the Central Assembly, tension filled the air. The Council's representatives sat in silence as reports from the Epsilon system played on the central screen. The faint images of the Dauntless gliding through the stars appeared again and again, each time reminding them of what they had failed to understand. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the elder diplomats broke the silence. "This is not about weapons," she said. "This is about will." And she was right. The humans had shown something the Council hadn't seen in millennia. Discipline under pressure. The kind of discipline that doesn't come from power or technology, but from experience. Every other species in the Council had lived in peace for so long that they'd forgotten what it meant to stand firm when threatened. Humanity hadn't forgotten. They had lived it. Over the next few weeks, fear spread quietly among the higher ranks of the Council. The Epsilon encounter became the most analyzed event in modern history. Military advisors studied every movement of the Dauntless, trying to understand its systems. Scientists debated how the humans managed to jam Council scanners so effectively. Political leaders worried that other civilizations might see humanity's calm victory as a sign of weakness in the Council's leadership. The galaxy's perfect balance of peace had begun to crack, not through war, but through realization. Meanwhile, on Earth, the story was told differently. It wasn't celebrated as a triumph of power, but as proof that humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. Across the planet, people gathered around screens and watched footage of the encounter, listening to that calm human voice saying, "We do not wish for misunderstandings." Those words became famous, printed on banners, quoted in speeches, and remembered as the moment humanity chose peace over pride. Earth Command released a statement to every world that would listen. "Humanity does not seek conflict, but we will always protect our people, our principles, and our peace." The message was simple, but it carried strength. Even the Council's people respected it. For the first time, humanity's actions had inspired more than fear. They had inspired hope. Across several Council member worlds, quiet conversations began to rise. Citizens questioned why their leaders, who had preached peace for generations, had nearly provoked a conflict with a species that simply wanted respect. Some began to admire Earth for its honesty and courage. Others accused the Council of arrogance. The galaxy was changing and no one could stop it. In private, the Council leaders met day and night, searching for a way to control the growing wave of doubt. Some demanded sanctions against Earth, claiming humanity's actions had destabilized the balance. Others argued for cooperation, warning that trying to suppress humanity would only lead to more tension. Finally, the High Chancellor, a being so ancient that even time seemed to move slower around them, spoke softly but firmly. "Perhaps it is not humanity that has changed the galaxy," they said. "Perhaps it is we who have refused to grow." The room fell silent again. Those words lingered long after the meeting ended. For centuries, the Council had believed peace meant the absence of conflict. But humanity's arrival proved that peace could also come from strength, from the courage to stand firm without striking first. Still, not everyone accepted this truth. Some of the older races, proud of their history, saw humanity as a disruption, a mirror showing what they had lost. They began spreading stories of their own, painting humans as unpredictable, reckless, and dangerous. "They will bring war," one broadcast claimed. "Mark my words, their nature will destroy what we have built." But the younger civilizations and the smaller species who had always felt overshadowed saw something different. To them, Earth represented freedom. They saw a race that had joined the stars without fear, without waiting for permission. They saw people who worked, built, and explored because they believed in progress, not because they were told to. And slowly those smaller voices began to matter. Trade channels that once ignored human colonies started opening. Independent merchants visited Earth's outer stations, eager to see what the humans were really like. They found ordinary people, engineers, scientists, farmers, children, all living their daily lives, working hard, laughing, and sharing food and stories with whoever visited. That human warmth surprised many visitors. They expected soldiers and cold machines, but they found communities filled with energy and curiosity. It reminded some of them of how their own worlds had been before peace turned to complacency. While all this unfolded, the Council's military divisions were thrown into chaos. The Epsilon encounter had revealed how outdated their systems were. For centuries, they had reduced their fleets, believing war was gone forever. Now they realized how unprepared they truly were. Old commanders who had never faced battle suddenly found themselves relearning tactics that hadn't been used in ages. Training academies reopened, fleets were restructured, and research centers scrambled to study defense technologies. Yet, even as they worked, there was a quiet understanding. They weren't preparing for a fight against Earth. They were preparing because Earth had reminded them what preparedness meant. In the shadows of the galaxy's great civilizations, change was taking root. For the next several months, every Council newsfeed talked about the human question. Should humanity be invited into the Council officially or kept at a distance? Should their technology be shared or restricted? Should they be trusted at all? Public opinion was split, but one thing was clear: no one could ignore them anymore. Back on Earth, humanity continued to act with restraint. They avoided unnecessary shows of strength, sent aid to struggling colonies, and opened their borders to peaceful visitors. The more people met them, the more they realized humans weren't monsters or conquerors. They were builders, thinkers, and protectors. They simply believed peace was worth defending. Still, the Council's leadership struggled. They had built their entire system on control. Quiet, balanced, predictable control. Humanity didn't fit that mold. They were unpredictable in the best and worst ways. They inspired change just by existing, and that scared those who preferred stability over growth. Months after the Epsilon encounter, the Council called for an emergency assembly, the first in over 1,000 years. Every representative from every world attended. The discussion lasted for days, full of arguments, doubts, and questions. But beneath all the politics, there was a feeling that something bigger was happening, something historical. By the end of that assembly, a message was sent to Earth. We acknowledge humanity as a rising power among the stars. A review for potential membership within the Interstellar Council will begin. The announcement shocked everyone. Some called it a victory for peace. Others called it a mistake. But for humanity, it meant recognition, not as a threat but as equals. On Earth, the message arrived during the early hours of the morning. The first rays of sunlight touched the oceans as the news spread through cities and colonies. For a moment, there was silence, and the kind of silence that comes before joy. Then, people began cheering, not because they had conquered anything, but because they had been accepted. Yet even in that moment of celebration, humanity's leaders remained humble. They reminded their people that this was only the beginning. Respect is not given once, one of them said in a global broadcast. It must be earned every day. The galaxy watched as humans continued their quiet work, rebuilding, exploring, and connecting worlds that had long been forgotten. The Council had expected a war. Instead, they found something far more powerful: unity built through understanding. And in the archives of the Interstellar Council, one quiet report was filed by a historian who witnessed it all. It read, "The humans did not break the galaxy. They awakened it." The Epsilon encounter had ended months ago, but its echoes still traveled across the stars, reshaping minds, policies, and beliefs. The Council's authority had changed forever, not through destruction, but through... The days after the Council's emergency announcement were filled with noise. Across the galaxy, news channels, communication feeds, and discussion forums buzzed with endless opinions. Everyone had something to say about the humans. Some called them heroes who had restored balance. Others said they were too bold, too direct, too human. But on Earth, things were quiet. There were no parades, no speeches filled with pride. Humanity seemed to understand that their real challenge wasn't in defeating anyone. It was in earning the galaxy's trust. The leaders of Earth met day and night, studying every reaction, every statement coming from the Council. They knew that power alone could not build peace. It was time to prove something deeper, that humanity could lead without fear, without force. In one meeting inside a simple room overlooking the blue oceans, a senior commander spoke softly. "They think we want control," he said, "but what we really want is a seat at the table." That sentence stayed in everyone's mind. It wasn't about dominance. It was about belonging. For centuries, humanity had fought among itself, trying to find unity. Now, standing among stars and ancient civilizations, they were finally united, not by borders, but by purpose. As the Council debated in their shining halls, humanity prepared their message. They didn't want to send a warning or a demand. They wanted to speak plainly, the way humans always had. The message would be short, clear, and honest, something no one could twist or misunderstand. Across Earth's colonies, technicians worked to ensure the transmission would reach every corner of Council space. Scientists synchronized the signal timing. Linguists simplified the translation so no alien language could distort the meaning. And finally, after days of quiet preparation, the message was ready. When the transmission began, there was no grand introduction. No music, no symbol of power, just a single voice, calm and steady, echoing through the stars. "We seek membership, not dominance, but we will not kneel." That one sentence stopped the galaxy. Every station, every news channel, every ship in flight replayed those words again and again. There was something about the tone, simple, sincere, and strong. It didn't sound like a threat or a challenge. It sounded like a promise. For the Council, it was a moment of reckoning. They had expected humans to act like conquerors. Instead, they found humility mixed with unwavering resolve. Humanity wasn't asking for permission. They were offering partnership, but only if it came with respect. In the following days, debate flooded the Council chambers. Representatives from dozens of species argued over the meaning of the message. Some said it was arrogant. Others said it was honorable. "They are asking to stand beside us," one delegate said. "Perhaps it is time we let them." But others disagreed. "If we let them in, we change the very foundation of the Council," an elder representative warned. "Their nature is unpredictable. Today they want peace, but tomorrow they might bring storms." Still, deep down everyone knew the truth. The galaxy had already changed. Humanity had already become a power that could not be ignored. On smaller worlds far from the shining core systems, ordinary people felt something new, hope. The humans had done what no other species dared. They had spoken to the Council as equals, not through fear, not through pride, but through honesty. In marketplaces, in classrooms, in quiet homes across the stars, people repeated those same words. "We will not kneel." They didn't say it in defiance, but as a reminder that dignity was worth more than comfort. Humanity's message had given others courage. Courage to believe that respect didn't need to be earned through power, but through presence. Inside the Council chambers, however, things were far from calm. For days, the assembly remained in session. Each member species took turns giving their perspective. Reports were shared, data analyzed, political games played behind closed doors. The Council had never faced a moment like this, not in the last 10,000 years. Finally, the High Chancellor called for silence. The entire chamber went dark, and a holographic image of Earth appeared at the center of the room. A small blue planet glowing softly among stars. "Look at them," the Chancellor said. "A world once divided, now united. A people who crossed the void not for conquest, but for connection. We feared them because they reminded us of what we once were. Determined, passionate, unbroken." The chamber remained silent. No one could deny it. Humanity had done what ancient civilizations could not. They had turned struggle into unity. After long debate, a motion was passed. Humanity would be invited to sit in the Council as an observer species. Not full members yet, but no longer outsiders. It was a cautious step, but it was history in the making. When the news reached Earth, there was no celebration. Instead, there was reflection. The human leaders gathered again, staring at the stars on their screens. One of them smiled faintly and said, "We didn't come to conquer the galaxy. We came to join it." On the streets of cities around the world, people watched the announcement with quiet pride. For centuries, humanity had looked to the stars and wondered if they were alone. Now they knew they were part of something larger, a living network of countless worlds and stories. In the following months, humanity sent delegations to the Council's capital. Their ships, sleek and simple, landed among the grand towers of alien architecture. Crowds gathered to see them, humans walking side by side with beings from 100 different species. Cameras flashed, translators hummed, and history took its first steps forward. Many expected arrogance, but what they saw instead were respectful faces, curious eyes, and open hands. Humans spoke less and listened more. They asked questions about other worlds, admired ancient art, and learned the ways of civilizations far older than their own. The council members who once feared them began to soften. They saw that behind the steel ships and bold words, humanity carried humility, the kind that comes from struggle. One council historian wrote in his journal, "They are strange. They build weapons to keep peace, yet they prefer to talk. They are proud, yet their pride is quiet. They do not demand trust, and they earn it." But not everyone was convinced. Some factions within the council still viewed humanity as a threat, a spark that could ignite chaos if provoked. They began working in secret, trying to delay Earth's full membership. Whisper campaigns spread false stories about human motives. But humanity didn't react with anger. They waited, patient and steady, letting their actions speak for them. During humanitarian crises on distant colonies, human ships arrived first, carrying food, medicine, and engineers. When a council world suffered an energy collapse, it was Earth that sent technicians to rebuild its systems. Slowly, one act at a time, humanity changed minds, not through speeches or power, but through compassion. The council's media began to call them the paradox species, powerful yet peaceful, bold yet kind. And while old politicians debated, ordinary people across the stars began to accept them as one of their own. In one of the council's capital plazas, a statue was quietly placed. It wasn't tall or grand, just a simple image of two hands, one human and one alien, reaching out to each other. At its base were the same words from the original transmission: "We seek membership, not dominance." Visitors from across worlds came to see it. Some left flowers. Others simply stood in silence, feeling something they hadn't felt in a long time: unity. Back on Earth, life continued as usual. Children still played, ships still launched, and people still worked to make things better. But there was a quiet pride in everyone's heart. Humanity had walked among ancient powers and hadn't bowed. Not because of arrogance, but because of self-respect. And somewhere deep in the archives of the Council's record halls, a historian began writing what would one day be known as the dawn of equal stars. His first line was simple: "The humans came not with armies, but with understanding." And the galaxy learned to breathe again. Over time, even those who had doubted them began to see the truth. Humanity's greatest power wasn't their weapons or technology. It was their will to coexist without surrendering who they were. They didn't want control. They wanted connection. And so the galaxy began to change once more. Quietly, steadily, hopefully. Old walls of prejudice started to fall, replaced by bridges of cooperation. When the next council gathering was held, the human representatives stood not at the edge of the room, but near the center. Their presence didn't command fear. It inspired respect. The High Chancellor looked upon them and said softly, "Perhaps this was always meant to happen. Perhaps we needed someone to remind us that peace must be protected, not just spoken of." And in that moment, the galaxy understood something profound. Peace was never a gift. It was a choice humanity had already made. Years passed after humanity's message echoed through the stars. The galaxy slowly settled into a new rhythm, a quieter, wiser rhythm. The fear that once surrounded Earth had faded, replaced by curiosity and respect. The Interstellar Council, once proud and distant, had become more open, more human in its way of thinking. And the humans themselves had learned too, about patience, humility, and the meaning of true peace. The council hall, once a place of cold formality, now buzzed with voices from many worlds. Languages mixed like colors in a painting. Among them stood the human representatives, calm, composed, listening as much as they spoke. They didn't dominate the room. They simply belonged there. No one saw them as outsiders anymore, but what had truly changed wasn't just the council. It was the way every species saw themselves. Humanity's arrival had reminded everyone that strength and kindness could exist together. That courage didn't always mean battle. Sometimes it meant standing firm without raising a weapon. And perhaps most importantly, that respect could never be demanded. It had to be earned. One council historian later wrote, "Before Earth, we believed peace was the absence of war. After Earth, we understood peace was the presence of understanding." That new belief spread quietly through the galaxy. It didn't happen overnight. But little by little, it shaped the future. On distant worlds once forgotten, trade routes reopened. Species that hadn't spoken in centuries began talking again. Colonies that had felt abandoned found help arriving. Not just from Earth, but from many worlds inspired by humanity's example. The galaxy had begun to rebuild itself, not because of human power, but because of human presence. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists, building new communication relays and energy grids that connected even the farthest systems. Artists from different species created joint exhibitions, blending human emotion with alien imagination. Students from 100 worlds studied side by side in new academies built under the Council's Peace Initiative. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy felt alive again. Yet even in this harmony, people still remembered how it all began, with fear, misunderstanding, and pride. The story of the Epsilon encounter became a lesson taught in schools. Children learned that humanity didn't win through destruction, but through restraint. That courage was not about who could strike first, but who could choose not to strike at all. Many young beings grew up admiring Earth, not for its strength, but for its spirit. They saw in humanity a reflection of their own hopes, the belief that even the smallest world could make a difference if it stood for the right thing. As for the humans, they continued to evolve. Their ships grew faster, their technology smarter, but their values remained grounded. Wherever they went, they carried something invisible yet powerful: empathy. They didn't just build colonies, they built friendships. Sometimes in faraway systems, people would say, "You can always tell when a human has been here." Things just work better afterward. It wasn't because of magic or machines. It was because humans had a habit of fixing not just structures, but relationships. One quiet evening, on the Council's capital world, the High Chancellor sat by the great observatory window, watching the stars shimmer like dust over velvet skies. A human representative stood beside them. Neither spoke for a long time. The galaxy beyond was calm. Finally, the Chancellor said softly, "When your people arrived, we thought you would destroy us." The human smiled gently. "And we thought you'd reject us forever." The Chancellor turned to face them. "We were both wrong. Perhaps that's what makes peace. Two sides realizing they don't need to be right, only willing to listen." The human nodded. "That's something we've had to learn again and again on our own world." The two stood in silence, watching the stars, countless lights, countless lives, each one carrying its own story. Far away, on a small planet near the edge of the galaxy, a monument was built, not by humans, but by the combined effort of many species. It wasn't tall or made of gold. It was simple. A circle of stones, one from each world, placed around a flame that never went out. At its center was a message carved in every known language: unity is not born from power. It is built by choice. People from across the stars came to see it. Pilgrims, students, travelers, all came to remember how one species reminded the galaxy what unity truly meant. Many who visited left a token, a small stone, a leaf, a piece of metal, to show that their world, too, was part of the circle. Years later, that monument became known as the Ring of Understanding. It stood as a living memory of the time when humanity arrived and changed everything without firing a single shot. Back on Earth, things were still humble. People went to work, raised families, explored the seas and skies. But there was something new in the air, a quiet pride not born of victory but of belonging. Humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as conquerors but as caretakers. Every few years, a new group of students from different worlds visited Earth to learn about its history. They studied not just science or politics, but the lessons of humanity's journey, the mistakes, the resilience, the compassion. They walked through museums showing Earth's struggles, wars, poverty, disasters, and how people rose again, each time stronger, kinder, wiser. One alien student once asked a teacher, "How did your people survive all that?" The teacher smiled and said, "Because we had no choice but to keep moving forward. That's what it means to be human." That sentence stayed with the student for life, and while humanity's influence spread, it never became domination. Instead, it became something like guidance, a quiet hand helping others stand on their own. The Council began adopting Earth's way of decision-making: open discussions, shared votes, transparency. Policies once controlled by the powerful few were now debated by all. Even the galaxy's oldest species began to admire Earth's simplicity. "They make complex things sound simple," one elder said, "and somehow it works." Centuries later, historians would call this time the Age of Renewal. They would say it began not with invention but with introspection. The Council learned that peace was fragile, like glass, beautiful but easily broken if left unattended. And humanity taught them how to care for it piece by piece. The greatest irony was that humanity never set out to change the galaxy. They only wanted respect, and in seeking that, they gave everyone else something far greater. The galaxy, once cold and quiet, now pulsed with shared purpose. Worlds traded more, learned more, and cared more. The Council's archives began filling again, not with war records, but with collaborations, cultural exchanges, and discoveries. 1,000 years later, when new civilizations rose and looked back through history, they would find the records of Earth's first arrival. They would see the message that had changed everything. "We seek membership, not dominance, but we will not kneel." Those words would be studied in classrooms, quoted by leaders, and remembered by travelers drifting among the stars, not as defiance, but as dignity. And so the story of Earth became a legend, not of power, but of purpose. On a quiet evening, beneath the silver glow of Earth's moon, an old historian looked at the sky and whispered to himself, "They were never the strongest. They were simply the most willing to understand." The wind carried his words across the ocean into the night. Somewhere out there, among distant constellations, the stars shimmered as if answering him. In the end, humanity's legacy wasn't in their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was in their way of seeing others, as equals, not as enemies. They had taught the galaxy something no empire or army could ever teach: that peace isn't built by avoiding strength, but by using it wisely. And though ages would pass, and new species would rise, the lessons of Earth would never fade. Every time a new world joined the Council, a small light on the monument would glow, another reminder that unity was still alive. It was said that if you stood near the ring of understanding at night, you could hear faint whispers carried on the cosmic wind, voices from different worlds, speaking together in harmony. Some swore they heard one voice more clearly than the rest, calm, human, and full of quiet pride, saying, "We never came to rule. We came to remind you what it means to care." And so the galaxy moved forward, carrying humanity's spirit among the stars, not as rulers, not as saviors, but as companions, forever part of the endless story of life that stretched beyond the edge of every known sun. The Interstellar Council was not prepared for Earth's power, but in the end, it wasn't their weapons or strength that reshaped the stars, it was their humanity. And that, above all else, became the greatest force the galaxy had ever known.